Welcome to the Things We Think and Do Not Say with Christina and Chad. Hello and welcome to the Things We Think but Do Not Say. I am Christina.
And I'm Chad. So this week's topic, our first topic, our inaugural topic, the dreams we have for our children. So this came about, as we said in the intro, I'm a pastor. We're doing a sermon series, and the topic for this past week was when our dreams for our children unravel. Nothing to do with biblical text, because it's really more about just how we handle raising our kids and dealing with their dreams and managing their dreams, and how that all plays out, sometimes well, maybe sometimes not so well.
Yeah, and so when we have dreams for ourselves that change throughout the course of our lives, we can justify that, right? I've changed, I'm no longer interested in that, or that doesn't seem feasible. But when we have dreams and goals for other people, sometimes we have a little bit of a harder time understanding or accepting when their dreams change, or they start to have dreams for themselves that differ greatly from what our dreams are for them.
So we can justify a lot of things with ourselves, right? Like, well, I didn't do this anymore because this happened or this happened, this happened. And I think we do tend to hold on to them with our kids. So we're in a situation where we have a 22-year-old, an 8-year-old, and a 7-year-old. So big gaps in ages. And for me, this really hit home with our oldest son, and trying to navigate. He graduated college, maybe contemplated a career change. I graduated with a degree in this, but maybe I want to do this, and trying to figure out what all that means, and will we hold on to ourselves, and try and be supportive, and recognizing, at least for me, I've changed careers. You haven't. Like, this has been your thing. How long?
Since I was in college, so 17, 18.
I did ask for like specific years. I didn't know if you wanted to be that vulnerable.
I knew I was going to be a counselor from a pretty young age.
Yeah, I did not. So what was your childhood dream?
Oh gosh, so going all the way back to the beginning, it was probably a ballerina, and I very quickly learned that wasn't going to happen.
I'm trying not to laugh, honey. I really try not to laugh.
So I think that a more realistic one was a teacher. I wanted to teach elementary school. And then that changed focus a little bit more towards the computer world. And so I went to a high school that was specifically for science and engineering. Very quickly learned that was not the direction I was going to go, and began to lean towards psychology. And the strange thing is that I actually kind of circled back to my childhood dream of being a teacher, because I've been a counselor for a number of years, and then went back to school for my PhD to be a counselor educator and educate future counselors. And so in a way, I've really stuck to my dreams.
Kind of went full circle.
Yeah.
You didn't stick to it. You just wandered back to it. Now, the funny part of that story that she didn't mention, that I'll kind of call her out on. There's one I will call out, one I won't. So you were scared of the teaching part. So when you started your PhD program, like, oh my God, I have to teach. I have to get in front of people. I have to teach. And through that process, that's been the thing that resonated with you the most. So it's kind of interesting that you had this dream, kind of went all around the crooked path to get there, and then we're scared to do it, and then we're like, wow, like this really is what I want to do. So it's kind of interesting.
Well, and I think in some ways, fear is a little bit of what held me back initially. Realizing that I was gonna have to be in charge of and responsible for a classroom full of young students was a little bit scary for me, and it did not feel okay. And with counseling, I could connect one-on-one with individuals, and the majority of my counseling career was focused on adolescents. And so I was still focused on work with young people. And getting into a counselor education program, I was like, okay, now I need to actually teach and be in front of the classroom. And this is really intimidating. And it kind of brought back some of those same fears, but it also brought back the passion. It helped me to realize, like, this is where I'm meant to be. This is what I want to do. And these are where my strengths lie. And so in a lot of ways, it was kind of fear that had me running from that initial dream, and ultimately conquering that fear allowed me to go full circle.
We'll probably have a whole episode on the paralyzing nature of fear and the destructive nature of fear. So me, I was going to play baseball for the Orioles, and I was going to be their shortstop. Judging by the current standings, I maybe still be able to do that because they're pretty bad right now. And when I went to college, I still went to college with the sense that I'm going to play baseball. But you have to pick a major, right? They don't let you major in like athletics. So my first undeclared major was political science. And I'm like, yeah, I don't think I want to do that. And then I was, oddly enough, a psych major. And I took my abnormal psychology midterm and I failed it. And I got it back and I got the results. I'm like, man, this is garbage. Like how do you pull this stuff together? And what I realized later after going to seminary was I love that one-on-one. I love that interaction. I love that sense of trying to help people. But I hated having to label people. I didn't want to have to do the diagnosis part. So my dream was never to be a pastor. That was a much later in life. So I get this whole career shift. I think there's a lot of kids growing up, that want to be, ballerinas or athletes or movie stars or singers. Nobody says, "Oh, I want to work at McDonald's when I grow up." I mean, that doesn't typically not a career choice that we dream about. Most of us. Although some days I think it would be nice to just unplug and just do something that's a little.
You walk into work,
yeah,
you leave work,
check it out.
Stays there.
Hang up your fry apron and you're gone with a bag of fries. So I think it's a struggle when you change careers. And I know for me, my parents were like, "You're gonna do what?" And that was much later in life. So now we're kind of dealing with this as with our son as he's like trying to navigate. And I don't know that we had a particular dream for him. Like, oh, we want him to be this.
Yeah, in a lot. Most of the time it was dependent on what he wanted to do. And so from a young age, he started playing hockey, so there were those dreams of, I'm going to be a professional hockey player. And so we're like, okay, right on board with that. You're going to be a professional hockey player. We'll do whatever it is that you want to do, camps, trainings, summer, at the ice rink, if that's what you want to do.
Yeah. So it wasn't, and I mentioned this past weekend, it wasn't so much that it was our dream. And I kind of tapped into this a little bit. I don't know if it was an aha moment, but maybe parents' dreams. Now there was the weird show with the cheerleading moms and the pageant moms where they have the little kids and the moms are like, cracking the whip to get their kids to be like beauty pageant winners and stuff. And sometimes I think that's a little more parent, mommy driven than kid driven. I think in most cases, I think we take what our kids want to do, what they articulate that they want to do, and then we push them to be the best they can at that. And I use the term push intentionally because it has kind of a negative connotation. Like we push people into things. But I don't know that we necessarily mean it to be that way.
Yeah, I think, one of the things that I failed to mention is there was this brief period of time after I started college that I was like, well, maybe psychology and counseling isn't the way to go. And maybe I just want to be a baker because I really enjoyed baking and decorating. And
you made some mean cupcakes,
things
I'm not
like
gonna
that.
lie.
Yeah. So I forgot to mention that brief period, but in that time period, when I was like, okay, I want to switch focus, there was that push from my mother of like, okay, so if this is what you want to do, we got to get you into cooking class, we got to do this, we got to kind of guide you along that way, we got to look into programs.
So your mom didn't revolt on that? Your mom was on board?
She wanted me to still graduate from college, or a college, but as long as it was
so Baker program. College would have been okay?
She would have wanted it to be like restaurant management or something, a 4-year degree.
Okay.
And so I think that in some ways that push ultimately led me to realize like this isn't a career that I want. Like I don't want to do this all the time and have to do it for work. It's something that I enjoyed doing, and I enjoyed it a lot less when it was being forced, when I had to produce. And so I think sometimes that happens as parents. You kind of are like, this is your dream, I'm going to push you, I'm going to do all the things, and then it gets to be too much, and the child's like, hold on a second, I was kind of interested in this, but now that like it's my entire life, I don't know that that's where I want to be.
Maybe not so much. And so I think the vulnerable part for me is that parenting sucks. there's part of parenting that just sucks. And I love my kids. Don't hear that as I don't love my kids. But damn, is it hard? And I think I didn't, well, obviously I didn't realize I hadn't gone through it, but it's harder to parent your college, early adulthood kids than it is your younger kids. At least I'm finding that. And I didn't think I was a control freak. Maybe I am. You can call me out if you want.
Depends on what you're talking about.
Yeah, I don't know. So I don't feel like I'm a control freak, but the inability to convey things to your young adult children is really hard. Like we can talk to our daughters, and they're 7 and 8, so they have a mind of their own, but they still listen for the most part. Well, one of them does. I'm not naming names, but if you know us, you know our kids, you know who I'm talking about. But parenting, when you you see it coming, you see the mistake coming, and not being able to guide them out of it sucks. Like, it sucks. And that's not to say that, and I think it sucks because we both know, we've talked about this both with each other and with him, and been pretty frank and said, listen, we've screwed up almost everything you can screw up. Like, we've done things that we're not particularly proud of, that our parents don't necessarily know. And if we can help you avoid those mistakes, that's what every parent wants. I think the truth is every parent wants their kid to be happy, healthy, safe, all those things. Not necessarily a movie star or an athlete. We want our kids to be happy, safe, healthy. So that inability to guide them, steer them around things. Like, we can go to the principal at the school and say, listen, there's this teacher is not good, or my kid's being bullied or whatever, and we can have them move that. You can't do that with your adult kids. Mm-hmm. So that lack of control is hard.
The recognition that your children have autonomy, that they can make their own decisions, that they are their own independent person, can sometimes make, I think, any parent feel like a control freak and want to take over.
So what I love about Christina is she just called me a control freak, but use fancy words so it doesn't sound so bad. So thank you. I love that.
So one of the principles in counseling, those of you who are kind of in the counseling world, is the recognition that our clients have autonomy. And so when you sit with a client and you know that they're making some bad decisions, and I say bad as in unhealthy for them, or something that potentially is going to derail them, take them off the path of where their goals are and where they want to be. It's very difficult not to say, no, don't do that, and start going into advice giving. Like, listen, this is what you need to do. This is what you need to say. This is how you need to go about it. And so as you learn to be a counselor and as you practice counseling, you're constantly in a position where you're recognizing another person's autonomy and allowing them to make the decisions that just feel best for them. As much as you can, try to help guide them in the directions that are best fit for them, which ultimately may not be the directions that we would want either them to go or we would want ourselves to go. And I think that in some ways that recognition can help as a parent. Being able to say, you know what, I made decisions for my life, and I, had that level of autonomy, and each of my kids needs to have their own level.
So we don't get a remote control?
Unfortunately not.
With any of them?
None of them. And I think that, another important piece here is a grieving process that as a parent, sometimes you need to go through. And I know that when we think about grieving processes, we think about the death of a loved one, or, the loss of a relationship that was significant to us. And so in some ways it sounds really big to call this grief, but in reality, we go through a similar process in many ways when we have dreams for our children that aren't lived out. And so, heavy topic here, anyone who has lost a child, not only are they likely grieving the relationship that they had with their child and the life that their child had, but also the dreams that they had for the future of their child. And so there's many cases where this comes up, such as, a child who may have an illness, some kind of disability, and things like that, where parents are trying to support their child and be there for their child, and also are dealing with their own grief and loss of this imagined future that may or may not happen. And so in my practice, I'm working with the LGBT population. A lot of times this looks like parents grieving, this sort of relationship, marriage, children, kind of thing that they had, these dreams that they had for their children. And now, of course, thankfully, marriage equality is the thing in our country, and there are less and less adoption agencies and things like that discriminating against individuals and families. But also within the trans community, is that sometimes parents go through a grieving process of, like, I saw my child in this gendered way because of our gendered binary and the way that our society works around gender, and now I need to think about who they are from a different, maybe gendered or a non-gendered standpoint, and that can be difficult. And a lot of times parents end up putting that onto their children, and harming their children in different ways because they are not dealing with their own grief cycle. And so there are different situations like that where the parent just needs to have their moment, but not rely on their child to be responsible for their grief. As a parent, we need to work on our own, and not put on our child, like, you're disappointing me, you're making me grieve, somehow you've taken something from me.
Yeah, and I think, and this may end up being a show topic, the whole idea of grief, because as a country, generally speaking, we are very bad at grief. We don't deal with it. And a moment of vulnerability, like, I'm lousy at it. Like, oh, you always joke around, you deal with everything with humor. That's like a common refrain. Like, she should really just get a sign and just be like, humor, not healthy. Is kind of what I do. But as a country, like, we don't deal with grief. We don't call death death. Like, we don't, like, we call, oh, they passed on, or they moved on, or they went to a better place, or they've gone home. And it's like, no, they're dead. Like, and I know that's harsh, and we can get into the theology of all that, but not today. But that idea of acknowledging that we die, and there is grief with that, and how we handle it, and how we judge other people. Everybody grieves. This is your field. Everybody grieves differently, but we tend to judge people and how they grieve, which isn't healthy either. So that's maybe a topic for another show. I don't know. I'm not prepared to go there right now, but I think you're right. I think part of it is grief, and so in our situation, like, so Camden is from a previous marriage, my previous marriage, but I never didn't have him. So he was like, it was like Camden and Chad, and it was always, then we had Christina in the mix. So there was that constant. So when so with him moving on, you do kind of lose that. So it's possible that some of my issues, my challenges are around that grief. Maybe we should have had this conversation before, could have talked about it. But we're kind of living it out here, which is kind of the point, right? The vulnerability, the things we think but do not say, and maybe the things we don't realize and say here, which works too. But it's a challenge when our kids go a different direction. You were reflecting on some of the issues with parents of the LGBTQ+ community, and you're right. So it's that dream is still possible, marriage is still possible. It may just look different now. The top of the wedding cake may look different than the way you envisioned it. The gender of the person your child's married may look different. But again, I almost made the statement, and I know it's not true. I almost made the statement with regard to this topic. They really all we want is our kids to be happy. But sadly, like, if that was true, you wouldn't have a practice. Like if every parent wanted their kid to just be happy, regardless of who they marry, like, you'd have to find a new job. I mean, right?
Yeah,
largely speaking.
To some extent,
And then,
I think that happiness is determined differently by different people. And so, sometimes as parents,
Sure.
we decide what we think happiness will look like for our children or what it should look like. And when that doesn't, come to play, we might think, oh, well, that didn't happen. But in reality, it doesn't mean that our children aren't happy or can't be happy with something completely different. And so again, it's our own process as parents and not something that we should put on the kid of like, you're ruining your own happiness. Well, maybe something different makes me happy.
Right. And so I think I don't know of a parent who articulates, or at least hasn't, that I'm aware of. And I'm sure there's some out there. They're like, man, I hope my child is gay. Like there's parents that I think are like, hey, you know what, that's cool, whatever, ambivalent. But I don't know that that's because society is set up that way, right? Like society is set up in this binary, and society is set up in the heterobinary, or the idea of heterosexuality. So we play that into everything. So when, for most people, when their children are born, if it's I'm trying my language skills here, assigned female at birth, oh, well, they're going to marry a boy. I think generally speaking, that has been, because for way too long in this country, that's how it was. If you were gay, you couldn't get
Right.
married.
And I think that leans a lot more on society, right? Because the
Right.
reason that a parent might say, like, that's not necessarily my hope for my child, it's okay if they are, but it's not my hope, is because of how so many people and so many structures and things like that are set up in our society, that marginalize individuals who are in the LGBTQ population and can be harmful and hurtful and all of that. Not because this is not who I want my child to be, but because I don't want my child to have to experience the way that the LGBTQ population can be treated in our society. And so looking at happiness from that standpoint of, I know that things may be more difficult if my child holds a certain identity or intersecting identities, that things are going to be harder in our society.
And maybe, so I'll just throw it out there because it's kind of like the elephant in the room. My profession has perpetuated a lot of that, right? So the church has perpetuated a lot of the negativity and towards same-sex marriage and just the LGBTQ community in general. I think you can lay a lot of the issues for those issues at the church. And that's hard to say as a pastor, because I think the church has to take some responsibility for that. And I don't know that the church has taken enough responsibility for the role that we've played in marginalizing an entire community of people. So I think there's a lot of church backlash for the LGBTQ community still to this day. I'm blessed to serve in a church denomination that recognizes same-sex marriage, and proud to serve in that marriage equality. Sorry, I'm proud to serve in that, and yet recognize that even within my denomination, it's not a universally held belief. And then that for their muddied waters that I don't think need to be muddied, but again, probably not for this cast.
Yeah, and so kind of coming back to our main focus for this episode is that as parents, you may have lots of dreams for your children and hopes of happiness, and hopefully we can get or gain the recognition that our children are going to find their own happiness the same way that we did, and they're going to have bumps along the way just like we did, and that our dreams and our hopes for our children should not be something that we're placing upon them as an overwhelming burden, so that they don't feel like I'm going to somehow disappoint or harm the relationship with my parent if I choose a different path. So allowing them to have that independence, allowing them to have the autonomy to make their own decisions, and just be there as a support to help and guide them, through any challenges that life may throw their way. Being able to go through our own grieving process, whatever that may look like, again, in our own time, and not place that upon the child, recognizing that that's us having to change our perspective of what our child's future is going to look like, and not necessarily theirs.
Sometimes that self-reflection, that look in the mirror isn't always flattering. I think we've lost the ability to self-reflect in this country. And I think if we're able to get to a point where we can self-reflect, I think we'll go a long way. So this past weekend, the biblical text was, for those, I'll explain briefly. So baby Moses, most of you have heard of Moses. His mom had to put him in a basket because the Pharaoh of Egypt said, listen, all baby boys need to be thrown in the water drum. And his mother put him in a basket. Long story short, doesn't die. And I said, how often are we putting our kids in a basket? And maybe instead of putting them in a basket, we should actually build a boat instead of a basket and hop in with them and try and help them navigate the waters. And maybe a step further after this conversation is, we kind of let them steer. And we let them steer the boat. So we're not doing the steering of the boat. We're in the boat and we're kind of helping, maybe paddle along, but let them steer and navigate.
And I even might go a step further. I'm not sure yet, just came to me, but to say, like, maybe we should just show up at the docks versus being on the boat, right? To have some level of differentiation between us and our child's journey, right? We don't need to be on the boat of their journey. I don't know.
I think you're always on the boat.
Okay.
I think you're always on the boat because maybe not. I don't know.
Something that I just threw out there.
We've already determined that I'm the control freak here, but
alternative.
What's the nice way to say it? Self-autonomy. That we have to recognize that others have autonomy.
That you lack the recognition of others' autonomy.
Yes, that. This is going to go really well.
So yeah, how can we recognize that, just like Moses' mother, right? Like, I want to raise my child. I want to be there for their life, but I know that means someone is going to come and rip him from my arms, and it's going to end his life. He's going to die. So I can put him in this little basket, send him up the river, and hope that someone else is able to care for him. And so obviously, like, her dream was gone of raising this child, but she did what she knew she had to do to kind of let him find his way and ultimately be raised by another person who maybe didn't share the beliefs or the lifestyle that she did. And so being able to accept that at least my child is going to have an opportunity to live and to make those decisions. If I let it go, Elsa, let it go.
So I think we're going to go home, and I'm going to take some batting practice and some ground balls to work with that dream of the Orioles, and we'll get you your tutu out, and you can practice your little ballerina steps.
Yeah.
Sounds good?
We just might post some video of that.
Yes.
Probably not. All right, so we will see you next time. Any feedback on the episode or any other ideas that you might have for us, please contact us at the email addresses listed below. Or if you're interested in being on the show and talking with us, let us know that as well, and we can definitely Zoom you in.
Okay, see you next time.
Bye.